we're an authorized Formula One Paddock Club distributor. So myself and a number of other people were out of a job. Even though we're Canadian, shockingly, he was a Schumacher fan. Don't have the big guns of Formula One there anymore. If someone wanted to buy it, we were selling it. Formula One, it's barely even sales at this point. It's more like asset management, I call it. I mean, 9 times out of 10, they'd actually pick up the phone, which never happens today, right? We don't need to be that sensitive to age. But, even strange just to say his name in McLaren these days because he's just the Mercedes guy. Everyone's, you're at the race over the 3 days. Well, you're really at the event for a week. I'm going from IndyCar to Formula One on the sales side. I mean, this is going to be a piece of cake. And it certainly wasn't.
Hello, welcome to a fantastic episode of Georgie Stripping the Dipping Ahead. I'm your unusual co-host, F1 Black. It's been a minute since I joined you. Today we have President of Canada Sport Marketing, Ryan McCallum. How are you doing? Welcome to the show. Hey,
I'm good. Thanks a lot for having me. Great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, we were just saying that it's afternoon your time, evening our time. Never a dull moment on Georgie Stripping the Dipping podcast. The last time we had Kate Bevan on the show, and she was the life and soul of the Paddock Club. And my understanding is that you are basically an authorized dealer in the F1 Paddock Club. Is that right?
Yes. And I know Kate very well, and she's fantastic. Actually, she's the person that brought me on board with the Paddock Club a few years back. So big fan of Kate's. And yeah, myself and my company, we're an authorized Formula One Paddock Club distributor. So we work with Formula One to sell Paddock Club passes, but not just sell them, also make sure our guests are taken care of at the events, and really just I almost say like it's like we hold our guests' hands the entire process because as most people know, Paddock Club passes, they don't come cheap. So when you're paying that sort of premium, you want to make sure you have a person that you can, sort of walk with you the entire process. And that our role is.
I mean, that needs further investigation, and I can't wait to dig into that with you. I always feel like we're at that stage in the kind of Hallmark movie where there's a record scratch, and then the question, like, I wonder how I guess you're wondering how I got here. So, like, Ryan McCallum, how do you introduce yourself to people, and how did you end up as an authorized distributor of F1 Paddock Club?
Yeah, good question. There's a really long answer and there's a short answer, but I'll try and do like a little bit of in between. I mean, just to go back like many years. So what would I say? Like 2007. I was working in Toronto for the Honda IndyCar race, which at the time was called the Molson Indy. The Toronto IndyCar race, which was Molson Indy. And that was sort of my first job after university in the sports world. After a few years of doing that was the year, I'm not sure how much you and your listeners are into IndyCar trivia, but that was the year when Champ Car and IRL sort of split. So Toronto Indy, along with a lot of other races, got axed off the schedule that year. So myself and a number of other people were out of a job. So in Canada, there's really only 2 main races. One of them was the Molson Indy, and the other one is the Formula One race in Montreal. So essentially reached out to the team at the Canadian Grand Prix, said, is there any sort of opportunities here? Have lots of great contacts in the hospitality and sponsorship world if there's anything we can do. So they ended up hiring me as a Toronto-based rep for the Montreal race, which was awesome, and appreciate them doing that. So we worked full-time as a Canadian Grand Prix employee on the sponsorship and hospitality side for a number of years. And then about 6 years ago, started my own company, Canada Sport Marketing, which is where we are today. For actually, I started it many years before that, but really gave it a go about 6 years ago, and had the opportunity to, through Kate, start as a Paddock Club distributor. I'd been introduced to her from a few different people, and at the same time, stay as a consultant to the Canadian Grand Prix on doing their sponsorship, which is what I'm doing today. So that's sort of my long-winded answer as to where I am today, how it's all sort of happened. But there's really two roles that I have in Formula One. The main one being the Paddock Club distributor, but I'm also really enjoying still helping out the team, the promoter at the Canadian Grand Prix on the sponsorship side of things.
That is definitely not the long answer, because I'm sure our listeners want to sort of delve into that. So, I mean, it's funny, you asked the question like, are your listeners familiar with the split in IndyCar? So we had Brian Herter on earlier in the year, and,
Nice.
Fantastic guest. And yeah, a lot of what we talked about was those kind of glory days, which like kind of happened, I guess, in Champ Car, because it was sort of post Nigel Mansell, and then, you had Alex Zanardi, Juan Pablo Montoya, and then obviously the split sort of died down, and we have what we have today. But yeah, at the time of the split, it was sort of huge for sort of American open wheel, and we hope to kind of get back to that. So you were working on the kind of Molson Indy in Toronto. You mentioned that you just graduated from university. Am I right in thinking you did a sort of degree in sports marketing or sports business, something like that, sports management?
Yeah. So exactly, I studied sport management at Brock University, which is in St. Catharines, in it's about an hour outside of Toronto in Canada. It was a 4-year degree, but while I was there, I took a year as a quote unquote international student and went down to Tennessee and studied at the University of Tennessee, where they have a big football program. And when I say football, I mean American football, where they had a really popular program. Peyton Manning had just been the quarterback there at that school, so really exciting opportunity to go down there for a year and study sports and get a lot of experience. So essentially, 4 years of sport management, and then coming out of that, like everyone, a bunch of student debt. What do we do now? We actually have to get a job. That's where me, like most Canadians, like, hey, I'm going to run the Toronto Maple Leafs, the hockey team here, the National Hockey League team. That's all anyone from Canada wants to do. But shockingly, there wasn't any jobs available. I still don't think there's any jobs available with the Leafs. So there was an opening with the Molson Indy at the time. I keep wanting to call it Honda Indy because that's what it's called now. And yeah, that's just how it happened. I liked motorsport back then coming out of university, but it wasn't something that I was like really like shooting to get involved with. But it just goes to show, I mean, like many years later, looking back on it, it's just applying for that one job and getting it as an account executive was like one of the best things that could have happened to me.
And it's one of those things where everyone has different belief systems, but there's definitely an element of fate in one sort of decision leading to all those possibilities and where you've ended up later. So I mean, before we get into your work in Formula One, it would be intriguing to kind of understand when you were so you obviously wanted to work on the Maple Leafs. They didn't have any vacancies, but like, what was your sort of background knowledge on motorsport at that point? Like, had you had any early motorsport memories before you sort of applied for the Molson Indy?
Yeah, well, funny. My motorsport memories are much like it's funny. So today, whenever we're talking to like Paddock Club clients, a lot of what I hear, because now I'm at the age where a lot of my clients are, whereas I used to be the young guy. But a lot of people I hear today are saying, well, as a kid, every morning my dad would be up early watching, the F1 races in Europe, because in Canada, with like the time difference, usually around 5, 6, 7 hours, depending on which country, you'd be up bright and early on a Sunday morning. And that was my first memories. My dad's very much into Formula One growing up, and he still is. So I'll still get, every morning, text messages from him. Did you see that? Can you believe Red Bull's winning again? So yeah, definitely a lot of early childhood memories, and it's basically from my dad being an F1 fan.
Yeah, I feel like I'm inflicting the same sort of life journey on my two sons, and it feels particularly raw because we're recording this just after the Japanese Grand Prix, which of course I hate to think what time it was on for you if you're based in North America, but like in the UK, the Grand Prix started at 6 a.m., which I know required some negotiation with my wife that invariably I was going to wake her up, sort of sneaking out downstairs to the TV. So yeah, like definitely a common theme among guests on this show that definitely parents, particularly dads, uncles, etc., watching the motorsport as children. And I guess like I'm not trying to age you here, but like what era are we talking about? Was your dad like a big Gilles Villeneuve fan, or was that after that period? Sort of what era are we talking about?
Yeah, well, even though we're Canadian, shockingly, he was a Schumacher fan. I know he was like the only one. But yeah, that's definitely the era. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, his claim to fame, I didn't think I'd be talking to my dad on this podcast, but this is real trivia for you. So the Canadian Grand Prix, before it took place at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, it actually, the first few years, it took place at Motorsport. We call it Motorsport, but it's in Bowmanville, Ontario, just outside Toronto. And so the very first Canadian Grand Prix there, he attended it. So that sort of gives you an idea.
Wow. I mean, I don't have that level of trivia, to be honest. Like, for some reason, I just thought they've always been at that circuit, the Gilles Villeneuve, but maybe they were just, they just called it a different thing before they named it after him. But that's trivia,
It's cool. Yeah, if you ever look at just Google like Motorsport Canadian Grand Prix, there's some pretty cool footage of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it now, using my Wikipedia knowledge. It's an interesting shape of a track. If you're listening, Google it. There's kind of something called the Mario Andretti straightaway that is quite long. So, yeah, have a look. Yeah, it's a bit different to the circuit de Gilles Villeneuve. But, I'm sure, well, it says it's Canada's home of motorsport. So I'd imagine it's still running. Maybe there's...
Yeah. They run like there's like a local, I shouldn't say local, it's a big deal in Canada, but there's like a NASCAR series in Canada, which is just like all Canadian drivers. And there's a NASCAR truck series there too, as well as like other types of events. So yeah, definitely still in use, just don't have the big guns of Formula One there anymore.
At the rate that Liberty Media are trying to kind of increase the North America footprint, we could justify a second Grand Prix. Sure. Although, going to we're talking about the Molson Indy and the Honda Indy now. Like I'm aging myself here and probably geeking out, boring the listeners. One of the first computer games I had was something called Papyrus IndyCar, and it had the Toronto track, which actually looks like it hasn't changed very much. It was definitely one of my favorites, like other than like crashing and hitting the wall all the time. It was probably the one that I could relate to most as like a European trying to watch North American motorsport. So yeah, it was like quite a cool track. So like you got that job. And what were you doing at that stage of your career when you kind of got that job in Toronto?
Yeah, it was essentially sell what you can, whether it was a grandstand ticket, a hospitality pass, or a sponsorship package. If someone wanted to buy it, we were selling it. So had a few feathers in our cap in terms of like the sales team. But yeah, it was a bit of everything. But essentially we called it corporate sales, which meant if a corporation wants to buy anything, we'll sell it to them.
I mean, I'm going to call your bluff here because on this show, I love to kind of steal people's sort of intellectual capital I property. And I don't mean like your company's property, but like sales, right? I've always been fascinated by it. I'm not saying I'm amazing at sales. Like maybe it's intrinsic. Maybe it's something that you have deep in your soul that you can't explain. But like in those jobs and reflecting on that period, what were your sort of tips and tricks for sales, for making that sale, closing the deal, or even spotting people that would be your sort of potential customers? Like, have you got anything that you can enlighten our listeners with?
I mean, no real like secrets. And again, this is like going back to and it still uses like a lot of the principles, although I mean, that's a conversation I'm sure we can have in a bit, but Formula One, it's barely even sales at this point. It's more like asset management, I call it. But back in the day when we had lots to sell, a lot of it was just, really just persistence and getting on a personal level with people. Also, like, again, aging myself, this was just when internet not the internet, just when like emails were getting popular. There certainly wasn't any text messaging. There was no LinkedIn or things like that. So the sales process was very different. So if you called someone at their office, which is what we were doing, I mean, 9 times out of 10, they'd actually pick up the phone, which never happens today, right? So
yeah, wow.
It was all about talking to the person, getting on a personal level with them, and calling them back basically every few days until you got a firm answer, which, call it Boiler Room, which is a good movie about that. But that's really what it came down to. But the one thing too is like we joke about it, like the persistence, just keep it up. But also there's definitely, you got to be careful because especially when you're calling people's offices. I mean, they have a job to do. So if you can see that they're not into it, just move on to the next type thing. That was something that was really important for us to understand as well. But yeah, just a lot of persistence.
Well, you've enlightened, or you've kind of revealed a movie that I'd not heard of, but has Vin Diesel, Nia Long, and Ben Affleck in its cast. So Boiler Room 2000.
Yeah.
We're gonna watch that after this.
Oh, it is a very good movie. You must watch it. It's got nothing to do with Formula One, but it's a good movie.
Well, the poster appears to be some sort of $1 million bill. So, I mean, I don't want any spoilers because I'm genuinely going to watch it in the next week, provided it's available on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney or whatever. I don't know. And I'll report back on Twitter, like how it's gone. Right. So, I mean, that is interesting. Like an era, I'm just thinking post-COVID, because at my workplace, obviously working before COVID, we were all, impersonating someone from the Victorian era of like turning up at the factory. I don't work in a factory, I work in an office, but like we'd all have this habit of like coming in 5 days a week. Even though now we've learned post-COVID that you don't need to do that. You've got the technology, but certainly unsolicited phone calls are a big, I don't know, I think the culture has shifted. Even if someone calls you, you're a bit like, oh, what's going on? So, it's changed.
Yeah, it definitely has changed. The entire sales process has changed, but I think for the better too. Because look, same thing. When I'm busy and someone's calling me to sell me something, the last thing I want to do is pick up my phone. So it goes both ways.
Fair enough. Well, good. So you obviously sort of they had the kind of merger. Is this the time of the merger, right? You're saying, or was it the time of the split between that you moved then to Formula One? It must have been the merger, right? I don't think you're as old as me.
Oh yes, sorry. Yes, that was no. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, you're right. That was when there was a merger, because when it was the years that I was working for the Toronto Indy, it was actually Champ Car, wasn't IndyCar.
Yeah.
So you're right. This is when they merged together and they brought in 2 different schedules, and there's only enough, dates for, there's 2 series. There's only enough dates for 1 series. So a bunch of the races like Toronto got axed.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I mean, I'm glad it's back because I really like that circuit. And even this year, like the weird thing that I enjoyed was I think they had like a huge wreck on lap 1, which was a bit pathetic, but fine. And then like Graham Rahal found a way to like reverse and then drive off circuit, like down the side road, and then appear back on the track to get around all of the mayhem. So, I still have a warm place in my heart for that circuit. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, it's great. Well, the reason I like it is because I can be there in 45 minutes, but it is a, it's like a downtown street circuit. So, I mean, you can go walk next to the track right now. I mean, it's not exactly, you know, Monaco where you can walk and see where the, you know, the famous turns are, but it is pretty cool where you can just walk down at any point. And, you know, the start finish line is literally just sitting there in a parking lot. You can get a picture next to it.
I mean, I was going to do this later in the episode, but in the UK about a year ago, we had this fantastic show. Well, the third series of a fantastic show called Race Across the World. And this one was, because Canada's so big, previous episodes had been like, okay, you're starting in London and you need to get to Singapore without using a plane. And you've only got like £2,000 or something, or, you know, $3,000. And then the second series was like, you're in Mexico City and you need to get to the tip of Argentina, Tierra del Fuego. And then this one was like, yeah, you're in Canada and you need to go from the west to the east, showing how big Canada is. But like, certainly they, you know, one of my ambitions is certainly to get out there, and, you know, talking about the circuit makes me want to go there. So 2000, I think the merger happened around what, 2008-ish? I don't know. But when you joined Formula One, I'm going to say you have been in Formula One for, let's say, maybe more than a decade. Again, we're being sensitive to age here, but you've got some time on the clock in Formula One.
We don't need to be that sensitive to age. But, doesn't matter. But yeah,
what era was that when you joined Formula 1?
2008 is when I started with the Canadian Grand Prix as an actual employee.
Yeah.
So
okay,
so that would have been right 2007, 2008 type thing with the IndyCar merger.
And I think 2007-8, like the way I look at it, is a bit of a change of the guard in Formula One, because, you know, you talked about your dad being really into Schumacher. I remember when I started watching Formula One, Schumacher, I think he hadn't quite won his first title, but, you know, it was definitely the Schumacher era, because all of the big guns, you know, Prost, Mansell, and sadly Senna, were no longer in the sport. So you had the Schumacher era, and it was almost like you joined the sport. Obviously, Schumacher came back, but it was the end of the Schumacher era. We had Alonso, and Hamilton was sort of probably in his first season, something like that, when you joined. Like, do you remember the aesthetic of the sport? Like, what stood out to you when you first sort of started working in that circle in Formula One?
Yeah, well, actually, what stood out to me, funny enough, is after having a few years at the Toronto Indy, was how loud the cars were. And I know they're not as loud anymore. But I remember like that first Friday morning practice, like walking up to the suites, like greet some of my clients, and just like, oh my, I feel like there was like a jet taking off on the runway. So that's always like the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, like Lewis, that was right when he was starting out with McLaren. It's even strange just to say his name in McLaren these days, because he's just the Mercedes guy. But yeah, that's when he was young, and he didn't. I'm trying to figure out who won that first race. He did not win that first race, but I know he's been very successful in Canada as well as and obviously a lot of races. I'm trying to figure. It was who won it in. Oh shoot, I should know that in 2008. Like it was someone who had you bet on it, you would have won a ton of money. It was not like today where like you can say Max is gonna win, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, because my heart wants to say that Robert Kubica won, but equally,
that's it.
I remember he had a huge accident. Maybe he had the accident the year before, but in 2008 he was like a dark horse. Like, obviously, he was driving for like Sauber, so he shouldn't be anywhere near the title, but he was sort of there.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is when I paid attention. I still, it's somewhere in my brain somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, Canadian. I've got the results here. Go on.
The funny thing for me, and the reason why I almost like don't know, is because like anyone who works in Formula One, I always joke, like, everyone's, you know, you're at the race over the 3 days. Well, you're really at the race at the event for a week working, and everyone, hey, what'd you think of this? What'd you think of that? I say, I never looked at the track for more than 30 seconds the entire weekend, because I mean, as glamorous as the job sounds, it is a job, right? You're running around doing things the entire time. So as a fan, you don't really get to look at the track as much, but now that's what PVR is for. Go home after and actually watch the race.
Exactly. Well, I mean, like, taking a step away from F1, and we're going to come back to it. We're going to come back to IndyCar. I'm going to drill you for your like opinion on everything. But like '08 was a time of like global uncertainty because we had the sort of financial crisis, and there was actually a moment where people were like, what, is my bank going to collapse, et cetera, et cetera. So you were getting into Formula One at a time when I know that Toyota probably were just about still in the sport, but were about to pull out. Honda obviously pulled out famously, and then Braun won the championship the next year. Like it was kind of a period of, commercially, it was like things were sort of getting smaller, contracting. Like, did you feel that in your role with the hospitality and things like that?
I mean, I certainly, like when I came in, and maybe it's just me being green, being the new guy, not knowing a whole lot. It did seem like, me knowing Formula One going into this, I'm like, I'm going from IndyCar to Formula One on the sales side. I mean, this is going to be a piece of cake. And it certainly wasn't. And don't forget too, like that's also when in North America, NASCAR was absolutely massive then. So I remember calling companies that, and the first few minutes of the conversation was seriously explaining what Formula One is, and telling them the difference between NASCAR. They're like, "Oh yeah, no, we know car racing. Like Dale Earnhardt, he drives a NASCAR." No, that's not what we're talking. We always used to say this is like the Olympics of car racing. Like this is all over the world. The best drivers in the world come to our country once for 3 days. They're like, don't really know what you're talking about. There's a bunch of races down in the US. So yeah, like the popularity, and it certainly wasn't like it is today. That is for sure. It took some convincing on sales, and to the point too. Like since COVID, since the Grand Prix the Canadian race has been back for the last 2 years. I mean, things have, and even looking ahead to 2024. Everything in terms of hospitality and tickets is sold out, like just immediately, right? Which is quite common for Formula One events right now. I mean, back then when I joined, like if you wanted to order a pair of grandstand tickets the day before things started on the Friday, they were available. So things have definitely changed, and it was definitely there. It was a sell back then, even though it was Formula One.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long. I know that clearly, like North American listeners will hate me for conflating Canada and the United States, but this wasn't long after that famous race in Indianapolis, where there were like 6 cars, of which only 2 were like front runners, and the other 2 were like all like high-fiving because they came like 5th out of 6. So
That didn't
like,
help.
yeah. Yeah. It's like, guys, remember that? Yeah. Oh no, I remember Formula One. Yeah, wasn't it that thing that had 6 cars? Yeah, like it probably doesn't have a good ring to it. And you're right. NASCAR was huge. It was getting to the point where, like, because at that point, I think Montoya had left Formula One. He'd gone back. He might have just sort of dropped into IndyCar, and then was like all of those single-seater guys were like going straight into NASCAR. Like that was the size. I guess it was like the commercial, like the contracts just made more sense. I don't know.
Yep.
Is that how it felt?
That's where the money was. So. And like the sponsorship was like, everyone has fun with it. Hey, there's like a NASCAR's got too much advertising on it, but guess what? Every single logo on that car is bringing them in money. So good for them. So yeah, it was really big back then.
So like, you're almost writing the pitch pack for like whoever in Liberty Media was like, right, we're going to buy Formula One, because it sounds like Formula One was, as you talked about asset management, it was kind of like an underutilized or below potential asset back then. How would you describe like the change over the period you've been involved in Formula One? You talked about clearly like you can't get those tickets at late notice, let alone a year out. But like, what has driven that change? Like beyond the fact we're not in a global recession, fingers crossed. Like, what do you perceive to be those changes?
Yeah, like for me, in my opinion, and obviously I'm running my own company, Canada Sport Marketing, working on behalf of Formula One. So this is not an official Formula One answer by any stretch.
Of course, caveat.
But from me, things. Well, the easy answer is Drive to Survive on Netflix, but I'll go back to that one in a second. But before that, Some people like may not like it wasn't that long ago, but Formula One did like these F1 festivals in developing markets, like in 2018 in Miami, 2019 in Chicago, and they even like Hollywood Boulevard type thing, where just show up with some show cars and or actual cars and the drivers, and they'd rip down the streets and do donuts and that type of thing. That's when Liberty Media was just sort of like showing off to America, like, here's what one's interested, let us know. And I think that I don't think it gets talked about enough. I think that those F1 festivals really, like, in terms of like the media looking at these things and fans just starting to like, they didn't go out and buy a ticket the next day because there was only one race in Austin at the time, but it got people thinking about it. So I think that was big. And then of course all these new races. So Austin's been around for a while, but then Miami and Las Vegas coming up this year. Like when I started at the Canadian Grand Prix, we were the only race in North America. There was 0 races in the US. So when like Austin started out, it was such a big deal. I went down there to the first race, like the circuit was only like half done. Like there's like paths weren't done. Anyway, now I'm sort of going down another path there, but like obviously the F1 festivals getting the race like Austin, I think that had a lot to do with it. Another, and then of course there's Drive to Survive, but the sort of the other point that I would bring up that I often like think about is the social media side of it. As you may know, like back in before Liberty Media, social media for F1 wasn't really looked at as a positive thing because it would pull away viewership from TV. But as soon as Liberty Media essentially said, hey, like go nuts, Lewis Hamilton, like tweet as much as you want, go on Instagram, and all the different races, you can have your own accounts and all the different teams. As soon as people could start to see what these like drivers and teams and races were like, sort of behind the scenes, behind the curtain, if you will, I think that really had a lot to do with it. And then just sort of the final point, which I keep mentioning, Drive to Survive on Netflix, which, I mean, everyone knows about it if they're probably listening to your podcast. But that just made that made the sport take off. And the fact that it was in 2019 it started, 2020 was the pandemic. Everyone was at home trying to find something to watch on TV. That was just a huge factor. The one thing that it's just like this point, and promise I'm not trying to sell you anything here, but it's just something that always pops in my head. It's like a stat that I always bring up is in 2021, the US Grand Prix, which was in Texas. So in 2021, the Canadian didn't take place because of COVID, and the Canadian government thought that it was too soon. But hey, in Texas, they're like, hey, why not? let's have an F1 race. So in 2021, just after Drive to Survive had really taken off, they broke the F1 attendance record with 400,000 fans at the time. I mean, it's now increased since that. And there was a survey that went out to fans, and it said 70% of the fans there that weekend were new fans. So like that tells you, that always just blows me away, that essentially the year after Netflix Drive to Survive came out, they broke the attendance record, and a majority of those fans were new fans. It's pretty incredible for me. So yeah, that's sort of my long-winded answer as to sort of where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, that all rings true. And, Drive to Survive, I've been with my wife, married, and then prior to that for like 11 years. And it was like 2 years ago that my mother-in-law started saying, oh, yeah, Gunther Steiner, da, 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 da. And I was like, wait, how do you know about Gunther Steiner? Watching Drive to Survive. So I think, yeah, it really kind of like permeated the mainstream beyond sort of people that like cars or racing like myself. So here's a question. To what extent do you think the kind of quality of the on-track product is a factor in the kind of growth of the sport? So you mentioned 2021. Clearly, it was sort of the year after the main COVID lockdowns. You know, there was a 12-month period when I think, like, if you added up all the races, it was like more than ever, and probably more than this year, just because they were catching up. And then we had that on-track product with like Max Verstappen leading for a long time, Lewis Hamilton coming back, and then clearly what happened in Abu Dhabi. Do you think that on-track product is a major factor in like additional growth, or do you think actually it's more around the marketing and the kind of media?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's so many ways to answer that. I mean, me as a fan, obviously I wish it was more competitive. Like Red Bull wasn't winning almost every single race. But like I do truly think like where things are right now, like if you're talking about like today, I don't really think the on track, if one team's dominating, I don't really think that makes a difference. I mean, the Canadian Grand Prix is essentially already sold out for 2024. And I mean, it clearly hasn't impacted those people's decisions. In terms of the Paddock Club, which I'm that I'm involved with in Canada on the like that as well as a sponsorship. I mean, there's no one that's mentioned, oh, it's too bad that Max is winning so much. I'm not going to get a Paddock Club pass this year. So that's just my personal, and this is a very small micro, like Ryan, the people you deal with, like, what are they saying? I honestly don't think it's impacting it at all, but that again is not a Formula One answer. That's my answer.
No, caveat received. And yeah, like, no, we definitely understand where you're coming from, because I guess, like, when you look at the decision making that comes from Liberty Media, and clearly, they have to answer to shareholders. They have a fiduciary duty to like grow their assets, grow the sport, make profit, etc. Like, they're not making decisions out of ineptitude. They're making decisions to sort of grow the sport. So yeah, clearly it feels like the sport has grown. You mentioned the festivals, you mentioned Drive to Survive, sort of irrespective of how competitive the on-track product is. Do you, so a question for you, I guess, do you think that there are particular drivers that, make it more marketable? Or do you, like, because I'm trying to think, like, what component is it other than the fact that Formula One has a historic kind of heritage reputation, it's a brand, and there's some loud noises and some champagne? Like, do you think there's any element of the sport, like the drivers, certain elements that make it more marketable than others?
Yeah, I mean, like, for the most part, I think a lot of it is just the fact that Formula One is the best of the best, and people, at least I'm speaking in North America now. I know in overseas it's always been known as that, but where the popularity is like really soared in Canada and the US markets that like I'm predominantly in touch with, it's just people knowing, okay, Formula One is now the pinnacle of motor racing, and people love to support the best of the best here. And I'm sure it's the same in UK and overseas, but like, for example, if in Toronto, the NHL Toronto Maple Leafs team, they sell out every single game. You can't get a ticket, but the team that plays one level below them, that plays next door to them, you can walk up and get a ticket for $5 and the place is half empty. That just sort of says like what the people just want to be part of the best, and that's exactly what Formula One is. But in terms of like you're talking about like drivers or teams that like really sell the sport, I think that just like people supporting a specific team is a big deal here. Again, it's probably the same thing overseas. You'll see walking along, you would have never seen this 5 years ago, but walking on the streets in Montreal or Toronto, see people wearing Ferrari gear, McLaren gear. Those are sort of the main two. Mercedes, you used to see a lot of, not so much anymore. And it's just about people wanting to support these teams. I mean, just from my experiences, not a ton when it comes to the personalities. Like I think Lewis Hamilton is one of the most fascinating people to like follow and watch. The guy's like amazing at what he does on and off the track. But that's not necessarily what like when people are buying a Paddock Club pass and signing up for sponsorship. That's not really what I believe is driving them. Although it could be, but that's just my firsthand experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I hear that sort of you mentioned, well, you don't see as many Mercedes shirts anymore. Do you think that's linked to kind of the downturn in form of that team, or just something else happened that, I don't know, I'm not aware of in the North American market?
Yeah, I think it's just because everyone loves to just support the winners here. Ultimately, it's Red Bulls everywhere. And if Mercedes wins a championship next year, then you'll see Mercedes everywhere. I think that's just really everyone wants to support the winner. But then you do have people who were just very passionate about Lewis Hamilton and what he means to the sport, and he's all the championships he's won, and those are the people that I today.
It's really intriguing about like the slight differences in culture. So like I think in the UK we underestimate, like I have friends that have moved to the US and then been surprised that there are actually quite strong cultural differences. We like in football, I guess it would be called soccer over there. Like we almost like take the mick out of people that support teams that are winning all the time. We call them glory hunters. It's almost like
Right.
you need to support something that, yeah, exactly right. It's a completely different. You need to support something that has like a struggle that like you win occasionally and then you really enjoy it. It's like the complete opposite, and you absolutely never change teams. So like, maybe Formula One's different to football, but also maybe there's a kind of North America UK difference. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just and again, it's just what I've sort of seen where Mercedes used to be the hot ticket, and now since Red Bull's won the last 2 seasons, it's not as hot. That's just sort of the reality of it here.
Wow. Well, we'll FedEx that audio clip straight to Toto Wolff and give him the extra motivation he needs to, I don't know, reduce the length of pit stops below 3 seconds.
And by the way, like if there's ever a team I'm supporting, it's Mercedes, because that when I started getting, really enjoying the sport, getting involved with it, Lewis Hamilton was the man, and I continue to follow him as my favorite driver. So I want Mercedes to do as well as the next guy, as the next fan.
Well, look, I appreciate you saying that. There's absolutely, I can confirm to the listeners that we didn't script that, and there's no pressure. You can support who you want. It's all right. I guess like segueing slightly, and we'll talk a bit about like on-track action in a bit. We've talked a lot about like growing sports, and I don't know how much you've been following IndyCar, but something. So I watched. I guess it would have been Champ Car in like the late 90s. Because it was on sort of free to air. It wasn't quite free to air. It was like the basic cable, I guess, like translating to North American English. Like, so you would pay for something, and then like this channel Eurosport would appear. And then on a Sunday night, you'd have, your Target sponsored Ganassi Racing with Alex Zanardi in it, and Andretti Cool and all these different teams. And then with the kind of like the way that Champ Car kind of cooled off, the merger, it kind of got quite small over here, but it's on the resurgence. And I also feel in North America, perhaps IndyCar's kind of on the rise as well. And you get that spirit when you're listening to the commentary, and it feels like they've got a lot of ad reads for like talking about particular drivers and their stories. Are you following IndyCar now? And do you feel that growth in the sport?
I mean, I am following IndyCar, obviously not as much as Formula One. And yeah, like I think just more so in Canada, like where I am, it's motorsport in general is very popular right now. And maybe I'm biased because I'm involved with Formula One, but I think a lot of the popularity in motorsports in general is from Netflix Drive to Survive. I really truly do. But hey, whatever it takes, IndyCar is certainly doing better now than it was pre-pandemic. And whether you want to say that's sort of the trickle down effect from Drive to Survive, I don't think it really matters. But it's certainly doing better, which is good. I mean, the Honda Indy attendance the last 2 years coming out of the pandemic have been like the strongest it's been in like the last 10 to 12 years. So that kind of says something right there.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that does, because, lockdown measures in Canada, but also, in the UK, etc., were no joke. So the fact that, the numbers are looking, setting records for the last decade suggests that there is growth there. And, it feels like there's an increasingly international field. So, in Formula One, there's a limit to 20 drivers. It feels like there's less turnover. So, you'll 18 of the drivers will probably keep their jobs this year, maybe 19 in Formula One. And so there's usually only 1 or 2 slots. And a lot of Formula 2 drivers, a weird number of like Scandinavian drivers appear to be driving an IndyCar. But yeah, I think there is an element of trickle down. And, long may it continue. It gives an alternative. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, and like, for example, at the Honda in Toronto, I mean, it's funny because I'm walking around there in this past July, probably saw more people wearing like Red Bull Formula One shirts than any of the IndyCar shirts. So it's like people in Canada they're motorsport fans, and I'm sure it's, and not just Canada, it's anywhere, right? So if you, I just really think that motorsports in general is a very, very popular right now, and whether it's IndyCar or Formula One.
That's really intriguing. So, I mean, you before we sort of talk a bit about us being fans of motorsport, and we can briefly touch on the season to date in Formula One, like you talked about, the experience of I don't know, the Paddock Club, but also just like that week. You said it was like almost felt like it lasts the whole week. And the thing I was struck by, as you mentioned, you sort of barely getting that chance to look at the track for more than 30 seconds at a time. What is it like end to end, when you've got clients and you're trying to give that experience, that unique experience in Formula One for a weekend in Montreal?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously leading up to the event, there's so much that needs to be done. But like at the actual event, funny, like always say like we show up because like we hire staff to like help us out throughout the weekend in the Paddock Club with our guests, and say the staff always ask, what's the plan? What should we be doing? I say there is no plan right now, but no one's here yet. They're all going to be here in an hour. When they come in, trust me, you're going to be so busy that by the time you blink, the day's going to be over. They're all going to be gone. So it's funny because there's no real game plan, but it's when you're with Paddock Club clients, and I think really any clients being hosted at any sporting event, you just want to show them that you're there for anything they want, whether it's a request, that we can or cannot do. It's just about showing them that you're there and you care. So it really could mean a number of things. But one thing that we do have a lot of fun doing is bringing the clients down to like the back paddock area. So I know I'm explaining it very general because this is sort of the way we explain it to clients, but of course you have the Paddock Club, which is above the pit area. But then behind there, that is like the paddock where I always say, you often see Lewis Hamilton cruising around on his scooter back in the day and that type of thing. So we can bring a limited number of clients back there throughout the weekend, just to sort of maybe get a sneak peek of the drivers hanging out, chilling, doing interviews, and maybe you can get a quick picture with them. So that's something that our guests like love doing, is going down there. So that takes up a lot of the time, but a lot of it too is just being there for the clients and helping them out with anything they could possibly need, which there's a long list.
I can imagine. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm trying to like visualize this. So my wife surprised me for my birthday earlier this month, and we went to Silverstone like for the weekend. And yeah, like obviously it wasn't a Formula One weekend. It was like this weird weekend where people that own Ferraris get to like drive at ridiculous speeds around the track, and there's like hundreds. But yeah, I could see where the Paddock Club was. We got to go there, which was sort of a raised kind of balcony almost that extended the length of the pit lane, but obviously elevated above it with, access inside to like a bar and, those sorts of facilities. And I'm trying to imagine what you call the back paddock. Like, I don't know if it's broadcast beyond, or you probably don't even have the time to watch it, but in the UK, we have Ted Kravitz as like pit lane reporter, and he does Ted's Notebook. And I'd imagine that like where he tends to walk around is the back paddock, where, as you say, you see the team personnel and the drivers.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like basically because you have like the team garages. So you have the team garages on the main floor. And obviously if you go out the front of the team garage, you're in pit lane. So the paddock club is right above the team garages. But if you go down the stairs to the back paddock area, that's where that's where like the team hospitality areas are, and where a lot of the team, basically where the drivers sort of hang out when they're not in the cars, when they're not on the track. That's where they have like their team meetings and that type of thing.
That's pretty cool. So, I mean, clearly it sounds like you're dedicated to providing like the best possible experience to clients. But over the years, if you manage to kind of meet particular drivers or like team personnel, historic drivers, etc., in your time at the race?
Yeah, for sure. Like it's often asking very politely, can our guest have a quick selfie with you, that type of thing. But there's also often like a lot of Formula One ambassadors down there, which are fantastic, and they take because obviously Lando Norris isn't going to have a conversation with one of our guests if he's walking out to get into his car, right? But whereas if you have like an ambassador like Jacques Villeneuve hanging out back there, he'll take the time to take a picture, talk to guests, and that type of thing. David Coulthard is another one. So you go down there, you're always bound to bump into someone, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think in the UK, like when you said F1 ambassadors, I would imagine like Jackie Stewart is probably one of them. I don't know if he gets across to Canada, but certainly he's at Silverstone.
Yeah, he's definitely one. Always wearing his hat and his Rolex shirt.
Right? Yeah, he's on brand, right?
For sure.
Maybe he likes it. I don't know.
Hey, well, he looks good. So, hey,
yeah.
If I can look that good at that age, then I'm doing something right.
Right. Yeah. He was racing in the sort of early 60s or mid 60s up to the 70s. So, yeah, looking good. So, here's a question to you. Obviously, when it's sort of Canadian Grand Prix weekend, you don't get to see it. But have you found yourself following the F1 season this year? Did you manage to watch the last couple of Grand Prix?
Yeah, for sure. Watch them, and definitely following. And yeah, there's lots of excitement. I mean, it was nice to see Ferrari win, not this past week in Japan, but before that, get to have that streak end.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's good. And the great thing too, and I think Netflix did a great job with this, with Drive to Survive, is like, there's more than one storyline, right? It's I think like what was a couple weeks ago when Liam Lawson got his first Formula One point by finishing in 10th place. Like that's a huge deal. But I mean, yeah, was he on the podium? No. But watching the races for additional storylines are sort of what I like to enjoy. And it's also, yeah, and me personally, when I'm watching the races, when they go in the pits, I'm if I'm not at the race, I'm looking up into the paddock club above, seeing what that's like too. So I'm always trying to get a sneak peek in that as well.
Right, exactly. I bet you know what you're looking for. So like you're right about storylines, and the Liam Lawson thing's really interesting because clearly he finished Formula 2. He didn't get a kind of a seat in Formula 1. He went out to do Japanese Super Formula, and I'm sure it was like days before he got the call up. He had a big accident where he was competing for the title in Japanese Super Formula. I think it might have even been at Suzuka. I can't remember, but basically him and his teammate came into contact, and he sort of flew up into the air and was collected. And then the next day or the next few days, as you say, he got the call up. He was at the race, and he's actually had the best result this season for AlphaTauri. So he's doing a great job. One of the exactly right. One of the storylines that I've been following with great interest, as people that have me on Twitter know, is at Mercedes, because get to Abu Dhabi 2021, Lewis Hamilton, I would argue should have won the World Championship that day.
I would agree with
Didn't.
you.
Yeah, it was, disappointing. I'm sure people have heard me go on about it, but, we've had a couple of years where, as you mentioned, Mercedes perhaps haven't covered themselves in glory with the car they've produced, but they've obviously they've got a new driver lineup. So Lewis Hamilton is sort of the old guard, the established champion, and they've brought in George Russell, who was there, I suppose, on their driver program and was placed at Williams for a few years. And it's been really interesting because that graduation for Russell from sort of, I'm really grateful to be here, to no, I want equal status. And in the last couple of races, there have been a few moments where, if you actually pay attention, like Lewis and George have, pretty much come to blows on track and have said a few things on the radio and in post-race interviews. So, is that something you've perceived? And, again, it's one of those funny storylines that you can watch as you go along. And yeah, is that something you've observed as well?
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, because obviously, like you, I'm really keeping an eye on the Mercedes team. Definitely noticed George being more, say, aggressive, where, before, like, I always compare it to, like, when you're starting out a new relationship with someone, you're being very super polite at the start, not really being yourself, just trying to put on a good show. And I think we're definitely past that. And he's at the point where, he's certainly doing everything in his power to win, which, I mean, ultimately that's what you want, right? But the last thing you want to do is get too close to your own driver, because I don't even want to talk about what could happen.
It's one of those things where I just have the impression that Lewis Hamilton, he obviously he's motivated at all times, but he knows he hasn't got a car that can compete most weekends for wins. In Singapore, when you mentioned that Ferrari and Carlos Sainz won, there was a moment where I think he sensed that he could win the race, and all of a sudden his pace just went electric. Like, he was 5 seconds behind Russell. He caught that up. Both of them were catching up the sort of top three. And unfortunately, Russell on the final lap had an accident. Yeah. But it feels to me like Lewis Hamilton is almost not in hibernation, but he's waiting. And when that car comes, like, that's when I would expect them to come to blows, not necessarily when the car is not competitive. I don't know if you agree on that.
Yeah. Like, so you're saying if there's a bit better car, the way Lewis is going to perceive things will be different. I mean,
well, because I guess they're not really competing for wins at the moment. Yes, George won last year, and yes, maybe at Singapore they could have won just about. They didn't. They're both basically trying to develop the car to get to the front. So one could argue that them fighting with each other at this stage isn't. The stakes are not really high enough. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I agree, because I understand what you're saying, and I mean, look, Lewis, you just have to look at the history books and see how much he's won. So he has that competitive spirit in it. Even like in those, so I can see him. Yeah, if he has a powerful car, he'll just do everything in his absolute power to win a race. You remember, like the years before the Abu Dhabi incident or the races that year, if he didn't finish first, he'd literally, he'd be standing on the podium in third place, looking like the most disappointed guy on the planet. It just, and I honestly think that that's a compliment to him. I mean, well, maybe smile for the camera, but if you just think if you're that much of a competitor and all you want to do is win, and it eats you up inside if you can't be first all the time, I think that's a really positive thing. So yeah, Lewis has that competitive spirit, and if he has the right car, I don't think anything will stop him, really, including his own teammate.
Yeah, and we'll be prepared for fireworks. So we have a question that we ask all of our guests as we sort of bringing this simmering podcast to a close. it's called Taxi Dinner Avoid. So it's a kind of PG version of another kind of game that we could play offline, but like Taxi Dinner Avoid. You've got the current Formula One grid. You have to pick one driver that will, because of his driving skills, take you to dinner. You got another driver that you think perhaps for his personality you want to be at the dinner table having a long chat with, and then avoid perhaps there's a member of the current grid that you'd rather not engage with. So yeah, Taxi Dinner Avoid. Over to you. Good luck, because I'm sure you're going to be asking for selfies with all of these people.
So you're putting me on the spot here. So okay, so just to make sure I have it right. So one is a driver that would just invite me to the dinner. Two is a driver
drive you to dinner. Yeah. Drive you to dinner because he's such a good driver. Second one is your company at dinner. Yeah. Sorry.
And the next one is
the
one you'll actually hang out with at dinner and have a long conversation.
Yeah.
And the last one is one that you wouldn't want to
avoid.
Have.
That's the hard one. We test your diplomatic skills on this podcast.
Oh man. Okay. So. Oh my gosh, there's so many different scenarios going through my head right now. Okay. I want to driving to dinner. Let's go with Leclerc, because he's driving a Ferrari, and no matter what I think of Formula One teams, I love Ferraris, so that would be pretty amazing. And he seems like a very cool guy. Hanging out with Lewis Hamilton, that's obviously a given. Having a conversation with him about all of his Formula One wins. And now this is the real tough one.
Yeah.
Who do we want to say here? And it's got to be someone currently on the grid.
I could give you a get out of jail free card. You could be soft and say, "Oh yeah, that guy from many years ago that we all hate." Yeah, but yeah, I'll let you pick any driver that's been in Formula One.
You know what? This is just a funny one. I'm going to say this because I know that he would laugh if I said it. Is the guy I wouldn't want to bring have anything to do with would be Daniel Ricciardo. You know why? Because if I told him I didn't want to go, he'd have a good laugh about it. There, I found a way not to criticize anyone.
Nice. Okay, yeah, see, right? We've tested those diplomatic skills. They're probably the strongest we've had. So, no, congrats. And sorry for putting you in that position.
That's a good question.
Yeah. No, brilliant. And yeah, we wish Danny Rick a speedy recovery. And I think he's due to be on the grid for the next Grand Prix. So fingers crossed.
That'd be great. Can't wait to see him back.
Absolutely.
And he, by the way, is one of the most open guys to, like, when we're down in the back paddock area. He, unless he's literally running to his car, he'll stop, take selfies, laugh. So he's a great guy to see if you have a Paddock Club client that's just been dying to get a picture with an F1 driver.
I mean, obviously, I don't know these guys' personalities. We only see what's on TV, but he does seem like more of a laid-back, affable kind of guy. So, yeah, hopefully he's back. And we just heard over the weekend that he's signed for 2024 as well, AlphaTauri. Right. So he'll be on the grid. Yeah.
Yeah. Just hopefully Liam lands somewhere. Not many other places for him to land, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. Anything can happen, right? Anything, injuries. In Formula One, there's never a dull moment. So I wouldn't count him out by any stretch.
I wouldn't count him out, but I guess like from a North American perspective, it feels like the major option that could happen is that Logan Sargent isn't renewed, ? And then clearly that would open up the seat for Liam, who, I don't want to do a kind of Nick De Vries sort of 12 months later, but that might open up the option for Liam Lawson to have a full season. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, we'll see. At the end of the day, he's a great driver and he'll end up somewhere. It may not be to start the season, but as soon as someone goes down, he'll be there ready to rock. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, he's proven himself a very capable sort of reserve driver to jump in.
Mhm.
So on this podcast, we go from the kind of jovial and flippant to the kind of philosophical quite quickly. So strap in, uh, you've obviously forged a successful career in, as you described, like perhaps the most elite sport in motorsport, and been doing that for some time. Like, do you have a vision for where you want to end up and where you want to go? Sort of what's the objective for you, Ryan?
Well, that's a very deep question.
Okay.
um, I mean, look at I absolutely love what I'm doing right now, and it's absolutely a privilege, like to be working just on behalf of Formula One as a Paddock Club distributor. So I'm very happy with what I'm doing right now. I mean, in the down the road, I'm more focused right now on really like the 4 North American races, the 3 in the US and Montreal, um, to be involved with like more races, specifically in Europe, Monaco, Australia. Basically, to be involved with the Paddock Club with every single race is sort of like a long-term goal to me. That's a lot of steps to get there. But right now, really enjoying focusing on the North American market.
Well, fingers crossed the sport kind of grows in stature, particularly in North America. And who knows, some of your North American clients will express an interest in a lovely spring summer trip to Europe where you can tick off some bucket list circuits. Who knows?
Exactly. Actually, we do have we had a number of clients go to European races this year in Monaco. So yeah, it's starting the baby steps. We just got to get more of them to take more vacations.
I know, and like not to be derogatory with like employment rights in North America, but one of my reflections, I used to go to Oktoberfest in Munich every year, and occasionally you'd meet someone from the US, and they were underrepresented there. When you talk to them, they basically like saved up their leave, their sort of annual leave from a few years, and maybe that's not the demographic you're going for. So maybe it's business owners and people that have more free time. But yeah, like give yourselves more holiday in North America would be I don't know, an objective
Yeah,
perhaps.
that would be nice. You got my vote.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, we're bringing it to a close. Where can people find you on social media, find your business on the internet?
Yeah, so I mean, for the most part, I mean, my daughter would be mad at me for saying that I'm not on, the major social media platforms. But for the type of business that I do, for the most part, it can be found on LinkedIn. So yeah, just
Okay.
type in Ryan McCallum, Paddock Club, LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. I do post quite a bit, at least once or twice a week. So you can follow me and see the things that I do there. But yeah, that's really the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you have a question to ask or an inquiry about any race, just send me a message through LinkedIn and I can respond right away.
Well, I'm sure our listeners will be in touch, and it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. Really fascinating to hear sort of behind the scenes and your experiences in motorsport, and in particular, sort of Formula One, particularly on the kind of management side. We have a really sort of fundamental and philosophical question to close the show. I'm going to set it up. Yeah, I mean, yeah, building up clearly won't be either of those things, but like, I presume that you like pizza, right?
Of
To some
course.
extent. Right, yeah. I mean, I don't know why I asked that question. No one's ever said, no, I hate pizza, but, you have to check. So this is the question. It's a binary question, yes or no. Pineapple on pizza.
Never.
The
Not a
man knows his
chance.
own mind. Massive. Okay. There's some fence sitters on this show, but, welcome to the dark side. I'm pleased that you've joined my team because
Right. It's
I
a
know that Georgie
strong,
loves pineapple.
firm no. It's a very
Yeah.
firm no.
One of the kind of fence sitting answers is Oh no, I wouldn't order it, but I would eat it if someone gave it to me. But you seem like you're quite strong in that position. Like never.
Very, very much so. Listen, I like pineapple, but I like pineapple with dessert. Like sweet is for dessert, right? Sweet does not go on a meal. Let's leave it at that.
There we go. Okay, well, unless we're in Eastern Europe, and there's some good stuff out there. But no, good. I'm glad I've chalked up one for the non-pineapple team. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Ryan, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I hope you've got some fun-filled afternoons still ahead of you. It's quite late here in the UK, and those of you at home listening, this will be out on the Saturday. The last Saturday in September. So I hope everyone that's still with us has enjoyed the show. I hope you are already following us on Twitter, but if you're not, at Strip the Dip, same on Instagram, wherever you're listening to us, or maybe watching us, I don't know, on YouTube. And now Ryan's looking around wherever he is for a camera that's secretly been filming him. No, I can assure you there is none. But do give us a thumbs up, do write a review, and put some comments down. We're really keen for your feedback, and we'd love to hear from you about future guests. So, Ryan, before we go, anything else you'd want to say to our listeners before we move to close?
I really enjoyed the interview, and thanks for taking the time. It's you asked some great questions, so it was really fun to chat. And in terms of the listeners, I mean, if anyone has any questions about really Formula One in general or hosting at any events, feel free to contact me. I mean, even if it's a question that you think is a silly question, happy just to flip you a quick answer. So there is a resource if you want to send me a message on LinkedIn.
That's extremely kind, and we definitely won't bombard you with questions during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend next year, or even during the Austin weekend. Who knows?
Yeah. Austin, and once Vegas is done in November, then you can really send the messages. No, we'll still respond.
Brilliant. Okay, well, pleasure, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us. And those of you listening, wherever you are, thank you so much for making it to the end of the podcast. As I say, give us a like, give us a share, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This has been your unusual co-host, F1 Blag. Until next time, this is Georgie stripping the dipping. Good night.